Hello, I am Bruce Posner, the person who supervised the MOANA with Sound restoration project. I'm the guy that wrangled all the cats together to make this happen. But I'm not the only person involved. This has been something that's gone on for nearly 90 years since the Flahertys went to Samoa and made the film, and continues through their daughter picking it up after Frances Flaherty, her mom, passed in '72. And she decided that she wanted to recreate the sounds and the environment and the music and songs that she remembered and her whole family remembered and thought that would make the film really something special. And as you'll see, it is. So, what we're going to start with is a series of slides and film clips that will explain the process that I went through and others to make this happen over this 90-year period. And I'm sure there'll be more to the story as it unfolds.
My father, of course, had started out life as an explorer up north. He worked for Sir William Mackenzie looking for iron ore. And his explorations began to take him further and further into the north, where, while he was still looking for iron ore, he really discovered the Eskimo as a people. He used cameras, still cameras, for his work. And pretty soon he was training his still cameras on the people themselves. And he grew to admire the people enormously. If it hadn't been for the Eskimo, for the Inuit, as they like to call themselves, he would have never gotten anywhere in the north. And so eventually he went back up to make a movie just about them. And that was Nanook. But he was still considered himself an explorer who had made a film about the Eskimo, you see.
You see, after the success of Nanook, the Paramount, the great Hollywood Paramount company, came to Bob and said he was free to go anywhere he wanted in the world. All he had to do was bring back another Nanook. A friend of ours had been living in Samoa, in a village of Samoa. The village was beautiful, the people were beautiful, and there we would find as much as we would find anywhere of the old Polynesian life. Go, he said to Bob, to the village of Safuni on the island of Savaii, and you may still be in time to catch some of that beautiful culture before it passes entirely away. So we went to Samoa. All the family this time went along.
Well, you have to remember, I was 3 years old when we arrived in 1923. The filming was done during 1924, mainly. We arrived in May of 23, and we were gone by late December 24.
And our intention, of course, was to make an authentic record of this dying culture. That was our mission. On the other hand, we were committed to the box office. So our problem really was to find that authentic drama in Samoa to match the fight for life, the authentic drama in the North. I remember the miserable weeks he just sat on our veranda with every thought falling away from him, learning the first hard lesson of what it takes to make a true film of a subject you do not know, that you cannot preconceive, that if you preconceive, you're lost. You're off to a false start before you begin. What you have to do is let go. Let go every thought of your own. Wipe your mind clean, fresh, innocent, newborn, sensitive as unexposed film to take up the impressions around you, and then let what will come in.
He had to shake everything off and really start to explore a new territory. This was new for him, And he had to go back to his old exploring instincts as a filmmaker this time, you see. And that was a very important lesson. All the ideas about having a great Samoan hunter of the ocean, the equivalent of Nanook, you know, the polar bear hunter, had to be thrown out because the truth of the matter is, although the Samoans very politely promised to produce an enormous stingray and great octopi and so forth, they couldn't. And the time was passing, but they did some marvelous dancing, you see, and terrific kava ceremonies and the whole bit, which my father ignored. He just didn't want to see any more dancing. He was looking for those sea monsters, you see. Well, finally he had to turn around and look at the dancing. And that's what Moana is all about. It's the beautiful ritualistic ceremony of Samoan life. The beauty of Samoan life. That's really what it is all about.
The film was basically shot with orthochromatic film, which was the standard of Hollywood at the time, but Bob found out really quickly that panchromatic film worked much better, especially in reproducing the islander's skin color, because the orthochromatic would basically make these people look black, when in fact their skin was more of a light golden brown. Bob processed and printed all of his own film on all of his productions, and he did so here. He found a freshwater cave and he set up a lab in it and went about doing that. The problem is, at a certain point, the film stock started having black spots on the projection prints. And they couldn't figure out what it was. They went through all the camera repair and the processing, and about the same time, Bob got ill. And what it was from is the silver that was washing off the film and staying in the cave water, which in fact Bob was drinking. So he spent several months near death.
And then, of course, inevitably, the climax is the tattooing sequence. I mean, the closest that you could get to sort of a drama in Moana, the tension that everyone looks for in a movie, you know, the high point is in the tattooing.
Come a minute.
I want to ask you something about Flaherty. When you went to Samoa with Monica, how much did you know about the making of Moana before you got there?
An enormous amount. Working with Bob Flaherty was a huge education. He treated me as a son. He talked about filmmaking. He always talked about Moana. He apparently worked out his view of how you make sequences, how you use the close-up as a way of grabbing the audience's attention. Monica was like 6 years old when they were there, and she remembered some of the songs they learned.
Moana was released in 26. It was shot in Samoa in 24. It was finally released by Paramount in 26, but that was still the silent era. And unlike Taboo, which was also shot as a silent film a couple of years later, by the time Murnau got back to Hollywood, the sound was in, and Murnau had to quickly assemble something right there in Hollywood. Well, nobody put any sound on Moana. Moana went in eclipse compared to Nanook and my father's other films. It went into an almost total eclipse. And because it was in that condition, I decided to try to bring it back. And the only way you can do that with old silents is to put soundtracks on them. We went back to Safuni, back to the origin where the film was made. I went back after 50 years' absence.
You found some of the old songs. You found words of some of the old songs that had
Well,
been
in the
lost.
Flaherty collection, somebody, I suspect my Uncle David, who did things like this, typed out words of songs which I remembered because when we were kids, of course, we learned the Samoan language and we learned to sing all these songs. And I recognized one of the verses as being belonging to what we used to call the boat song, Tau Malualuai, which is a song that the film now opens with. And I brought these typed out pese verses, all done in, written out in Samoan, and I told the chiefs when I first arrived in Savoy, they were very curious to know why I had to come, and they were looking at me rather suspiciously, and I said, well, I've come to hear you sing, which I think made them relax quite a bit. And I showed these verses to Chief Taulelea, and I said, this is what we have from those days. And I started to hum one of them. And he said, yes, we remember that song, but we've forgotten the words. So I was able to provide them their own words again, and they went off and rehearsed and, relearned that song so that they could sing it from Moana.
Did you have people recreate the action and then record it, or?
No. We didn't do any of that.
Uh-huh.
We just collected sound.
Just collected sounds that would go with it.
Yeah.
We did a lot of wild recording, and then we went back to Boston to see whether any of it was going to work. We were in a totally experimental, condition. We didn't think it was going to work, as a matter of fact. Then when we saw that it was not alien to the picture, then we started, thinking more seriously about it.
Here's another image of Monica recording sound to match the film. And here's Ricky Leacock on set recording a man scraping the coconut hulls, and you see the mic in Ricky's hand. And here is Ricky in the water with the mic right in front of his midsection in the boat to catch the rowing sounds and whatnot. Now, the importance of Ricky being on the shoot cannot be understated, in the sense that Ricky was a seasoned professional in documentary filmmaking, and in particular involved with the sound on film aspect of how to get sound on film. Was instrumental in that in the development of film history. But his early training was such that he knew how to shoot silent film and then record sound that matched and was edited. This was a very common practice. And I think this helped Monica tremendously while making the film.
And what about the places where there's dialogue?
Monica went to Hawaii, where there were a lot of Samoan people, and they figured out what it was that was said, and Monica recorded it and dubbed it in sync.
When Ricky Leacock Getting back with Monica to the island to film, they obviously had to find other people to do the voices for the characters, and they lip-sunk to the silent film. And here is a picture of the wonderful Ifo, who plays Fangazi in the film, so to speak, her voice. And here's the dialogue that Monica and Ricky figured out by lip-syncing with Samoans watching the film in this passage. So it's in Samoan on the left and on English on the right about the vine drinking. Once Monica got back to the States with these hours and hours of recordings, she spent years editing.
After Monica finished the editing, she brought it to me in New York, and we started working on the film. She brought in many soundtracks, the backgrounds, the music, and they actually did some dialogue to synchronize with the image on the screen. Working with Monica was quite a trip. She really knew what she wanted. She had an idea in her head and her memory of what it actually sounded like being in these locations, which helped me recreate the effects and put them together to make it match as close as I could with what she remembered.
Isn't it amazing taking something that was silent and making it into a sync sound film? Is so cool.
Ricky also gives great insight to the film when he makes this statement: the human relationships in the films are remarkable in that they are so delicately indicated and convey kindness, self-respect, and mutual respect in work and in play. It was not until I saw Moana in Samoa, where Monica Flaherty and I projected the film in the village, in which it had been filmed some 50 years before, with Pei, now in his 60s, commenting as the film was shown, that I realized fully the amount of humor and light banter in this film, and how much warmth. Look carefully and you will see for yourself. Some of the comments on the film, here's one from Virgil Thompson from 1981. Your soundtrack of Moana is a masterpiece. All of it's real, both language and music, and all of it fitting so naturally. It is as if it had been recorded with the picture and belonged there. I do not know of any other film that accomplishes this so convincingly. To have it with so precious a document as Moana gives a great picture, a new life, and certainly a long one. And then Kevin Brownlow probably gives even an equally great compliment when he says, in 1981 too, I went to your show Moana with Sound in fear and trepidation. I was convinced it would be embarrassing and ruinous to the original, but the soundtrack was astonishing. It is the best job of post-synchronization I have seen. I have spent months fitting dialogue to my film, but I failed to get the astonishing spontaneity you achieved. The effect is natural, and there can be no greater compliment. It seemed dead right. And as the person, Alan Seymour, who worked with Monica back in Vermont, editing and putting the film together, said, her soundtrack was dense. It was full. It was like Monica was standing beside her father with a Nagra, which is a sound recording camera.
As far as the dance sequence goes, there was nothing that would fit. We went back to Safuni, back to the origin where the film was made. I went back after 50 years' absence, was greeted as the daughter of the American millionaire, which didn't help. And we did a lot of wild recording, and then we went back to Boston to see whether any of it was going to work. We were in a totally experimental, condition. We didn't think it was going to work, as a matter of fact. Then when we saw that it was not alien to the picture, then we started thinking more seriously about it. But meanwhile, as far as dancing goes, that was a serious problem. And when I got to that sequence, there was nothing that would stay in sync, and you can't cut into a music tape. So I went back to Hawaii, where I had a number of Samoans lined up there, and we decided to do some special music to the dancing sequence. And that would be drumming. I found that drumming seemed to be the most adaptable to Flaherty's obviously European point of view when he was photographing the dance sequence, in which the camera concentrates mainly on the man. And we got 3 Samoans and their drums into the studios at Sinopec in Hawaii under controlled conditions, and they said that no question about it, they could drum to the film. And they started, and they did pretty well, but it's a long sequence. It lasts almost 2 minutes, and sure enough, they gradually slid out of sync, you see. And they couldn't believe that they were doing this, because we'd play it back to them, and you could see they were going out of sync. I went back to the States, and I decided to borrow a friend's metronome, and I put it on the editing table, and I, with the metronome, got the beat, you see. And then I transferred this onto Mag, and laid it in, did a scratch mix. I've done 3 scratch mixes before the final mix, and went back to Hawaii each time with them. Well, this was one of those occasions. And went back, and I said, now, listen to this. And what you're hearing, of course, the film is running, but in sync with it is just the metronomic beat. There are 2 beats in that dance sequence. There's a slow one and then a faster one. Well, to make a very long story short, we tried everything, and we ended up by blindfolding the 3 drummers, seeing to it that they didn't look at each other, and certainly not at the film. And then we put earplugs in each one of their little ears, in which they had the metronomic beat. And we told them, you don't have to think about anything. You don't have to think about when you're going to begin or when you're going to stop. Just follow that beat.
And it worked?
And it worked. That's what you see.
It works beautifully.
It's in sync.
It is.
You see, that was one sequence that had to be in sync. And that's the way we did it.
How extraordinary.
As you can see here, there's some documents that Monica Flaherty generated while she was working on the project between 1974 and 1980. And this is a description, very clear, from August 1977. The MOANA Sound Project, what purpose does MOANA Sound Project serve? And she answers it with 4 points. The re-release of the film to a larger public, the preservation of the film itself, the preservation of traditional Samoan music associated with the film, and the collection of on-site data pertaining to the making of Moana. Monica Flaherty stresses the point that not one frame of the original print has been changed. This is really important, especially for the restoration aspect. In fact, even the original titles have been kept intact. What has been added is a soundtrack of music and dialogue which complements the poetic vision of her father's original masterpiece. And further, from the start, we agreed that it would be essential to maintain Moana at its original silent 18 frames a second pace. To do this and still add sound at 24 frames a second means stretching the film. The conventional stretch method is to optically print with every second frame repeated twice at a ratio of 2 to 3. A 16mm version made for the project at Blackhawk Films has certain drawbacks.
Actually, the stretch print that we've been looking at right now in 16 is a sort of a conglomeration of the best of 3 different Moana prints that Mr. Shepard assembled from my mother's personal collection.
Now, speaking of Kevin Brownlow, I have to bring up this person that we see in this picture with Kevin, and whose name is the film preservationist and historian David Shepard. David is key to the longevity and life and the preservation of all of the Flaherty films. But David was involved with this way before even Monica. And as he says here, no reversal was ever part of this process. From the Claremont master print, Blackhawk made a stretched printed dupe negative for Monica. The Claremont print is made from the original camera negative. It is an assembly of 2 prints that had been Robert Flaherty's and were at the farm, both made from the original negative, both well used and splicey. I made one print that, as nearly as possible, had every shot and title at its full length with no internal splices. Monica had nothing to do with the assembly. It was done entirely by me in 1967, not in the 1970s. But let's go back to the beginning. Here's the front page of the contract between Paramount, which is famous Players Lasky Corporation, and Robert Flaherty from February 1923. And what's interesting here, it shows you that we entered into an agreement, that the description is exactly what the film is. So this is beautiful, I think. The producer hereby agrees to produce with reasonable dispatch, upon the completion of arrangements therefore, to the Samoan Islands, and after study and investigation of the customs and habits of the people and the topography and geography of the country, with a view to its scenic and artistic availability, as the producer may deem advisable, proceed to photograph, make, and take a motion picture production of what is known in the motion picture industry as feature length, which shall artistically and dramatically present upon the screen the habits, customs, life, and condition of the natives of the said islands of Samoa, or any of them which the producer may select with such plot or other form of construction that the producer may decide shall best portray the said customs and conditions, etc., etc. An exact description of Flaherty's working method without all the flowery language. Now, later, Paramount grants to her permission to work on a sound version. As you can see in this letter, The Great Gatsby is taking precedence in their negotiations, but nonetheless, Mr. Reardon does agree that Paramount and Monica shall work together on this. And then later, Monica kept trying to go back to Paramount to get the original materials back and get the film title back, because in fact, that was part of the original contract. But here's a letter from May 25th, 1989 by the president, Frank Mancuso, who explains his great admiration of Flaherty and whatnot, but unfortunately they have not been in a recoup position to return the materials, and will do so as soon as that happens. As you can imagine, that hasn't happened. Now the other connection, which is important to bring up here in this Monica story, side story, is D.A. Don Allen Pennebaker, the great documentary filmmaker. And here we see a picture of Don holding a picture of Bob Flaherty in his office in New York. And why this is important is Don took over the mantle mainly to help out Monica get this film into theaters and get this into a 35 millimeter print, because as we've said, she only made the 16 millimeter print because of finances and this and that. And everybody thought if they got it into 35 millimeter format, this could become an official Flaherty film. Back to Mr. Pennebaker, a letter to Haskell Wexler, the great cinematographer and friend of Pennebaker's. He is asking Haskell to help out, and here's Pennebaker. Under Jesse Lasky released the picture as a silent film. They also wrote a contract with Flaherty that they would give him the negative when the film had paid back its negative cost. When Flaherty requested the negative in an accounting in 1938, he was told that it hadn't made enough back at that time. A few years later, he was told that the negative, which was nitrate, had been destroyed. In the early 70s, when Monica first began to thinking of putting a soundtrack on the film, she, et cetera, as we know. And then later, when I got involved in the project and I was trying to get Penny to help us and rearrange things to make this thing go further than he was able to at the time, which was in the 1990s. Here's a letter he wrote to Marty Scorsese on September 10th, 2012. Marty, I'm writing to you about a project we began many years ago. You should remember it because you gave $10K to help it along. It was Monica's attempt to turn Moana from a silent film into a talkie. She and Ricky Leacock spent almost a year, and it goes on in great detail about the current situation as Penny saw it. And he ends with, it sounds a bit complicated, but I wanted you to know where we all stand right now. Maybe you can get someone who loves you at Paramount to help find a solution. Well, unfortunately, that never happened, which is sad. But nonetheless, even when we were in the midst of restoring the film, or right on the edge of restoring it, I wrote to Robert Gardner, who has connections to all this over a long period of time, and on this production, you will see him interviewing Francis Flaherty about the making of the film, a piece that was made in 1960 from the Peabody Museum at Harvard. But anyway, here's March 16th letter to me from Bob. Nice to see you are still in the game of preservation. I have long felt that Moana was intended as a silent film, and interventions by Monica and Ricky Leacock, to the contrary, have never sat well. But the restored film of such magnitude is better than no film at all. I think I will pass on the contribution, et cetera, and good luck. Now, what I found, I did not know at the time he was very ill, and he died soon thereafter, which is a sad event. But what was interesting for me about this is the fact that the main print of Moana, the original film that everybody has seen over the decades, mainly came from Harvard, of all places. And what you're seeing now is a letter to Julian Levy, the gallery owner in New York City, and the man who brought surrealism to the United States. Is one way to look at Julian. And he was starting a film society when he opened his gallery in 1932. And he was reaching out to everybody he knew that had films, in particular his Harvard buddies. He was a Harvard grad. And here he is writing back to the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard. This is, I think, mid to late 1932. It's undated here, but it's just an approximate related to other letters. But it's to Chandler R. Post. Chandler Post responds to Julian Levy saying, "We have only 12 films in the collection, in the archive." And you can see the titles: The Black Pirate, The Strong Man, What Price Glory, Wedding Bells, Beau Guest, The General, but also Moana. And this particular print of Moana is what eventually, by 1936, was given to the Museum of Modern Art to copy. And then, in fact, they got an agreement with Paramount to be able to show it in non-theatrical settings. And that is how most people saw the film. Anyway, while everybody's talking, the film is rotting, as you can see here, and you'll see in some of the film clips. And in fact, even when we were restoring the film, when we were still seeking out elements at the last moment, and this was a picture that was sent to us by the Cinémathèque Française in Paris, when in June they opened the cans that had been sitting on the shelf for decades and discovered this.
I understand from Monica that her father pleaded with Paramount to let him preserve the original negative. They didn't, and all the original negatives of the film were destroyed. And so the material that Monica has had to work with is gathered from all over the world.
This is an idea of the kind of chart that she used from the various sources that she found, because that's the whole key here, is what was the best source available. And you see a variety of listings here, and you also see an idea of how Monica's mind worked by the way she typed this up and put this together in the notes she made. There's Library of Congress material, there's Harvard material, there's Paramount material, et cetera, et cetera. Now, to show you how maybe unbalanced I am, here's my chart. And you'll notice in the top column, I took the 16mm version. Monica finally had to make a 16mm version, not 35, for all kinds of reasons. But if you convert those footage and frames to 35mm, you see that at the different speeds, you have different lengths of footage of what the film could be at 24 or 16 or 18 frames a second. This is important when cross-referencing with the copyright version, which you see in the second column, which says it's 6,133 feet in 35mm as copyrighted. The third and last part, the bottom part of this chart, shows you the various sources that I was able to locate and examine by hand. These are things I held in my hand and put through a synchronizer and was able to measure. And if you go way to the bottom line, you'll see that none of those footages come close to the 6,000 feet. They're off by a couple hundred feet, which means that I was able to find anywhere from a couple minutes to 5-7 minutes off of the copyright version of footage available. Now, when you're searching for footage, you have to look basically for film archives or private collectors. And in this case, we searched the world, and the Library of Congress had the best material that we were able to access and have, and closest to the original negative.
What a gift to the world.
Yeah.
You know, to...
Because the film is just unknown.
I met in person Monica only once, and that was in 1984, April 1984. Cecile Starr was visiting us to do a series of lectures in New Hampshire, and I was living in Claremont, New Hampshire, which is about 40 minutes away from the Flaherty farm down in Dummerston, Vermont. Monica was invited to dinner because she wanted to see Cecile, but also the Bill and Stella Pence of the Telluride Film Festival had just moved to the area to run the film program at Dartmouth College. So we had this grand evening planned in honor of Monica coming to visit us and see us. And so we're waiting at the house for dinner, and we're waiting, and then the time passed. It was 8 o'clock at night, and there was no Monica, but I know she had left home. And eventually somebody said, well, you better go see her. I lived on a mountaintop, and I drove down to town, Claremont, driving around town, and I found Monica asleep in front of a Dunkin' Donuts in her car. She said she decided to take a nap. We got her up to the house. All the introduction was made, started the wine passing around, started the dinner. And my partner at the time, Mary, had made this beautiful rack of lamb that we were going to wine and dine her. All the silver was out, and all this elegance was happening, and the wine was flowing. I wish it was champagne. And then Monica's like looking at all of us, and then all of a sudden, I guess she decided she had enough. And she stood up at the table, reached over to this beautiful crown roast rack of lamb, and ripped the chops apart from it, one with each hand, and was saying, "This is how an Irish person eats lamb," and like that. And we were just all stunned, and the evening, as you can see, went sideways from that. What I didn't know at the time, and didn't know till decades later, was that Monica had just finished this film, Moana with Sound, and was carting it around the world. And the reason she came to dinner was she wanted to get it in the Telluride Film Festival. And this was a direct route to the Pences and the festival, and as you can imagine, it didn't happen. In fact, Moana with Sound didn't get to the Telluride Film Festival until, I think it's probably 2010. Or 2011, after Monica had passed, and Sammy Van Eygen, the great-grandson of the Flahertys, got together the materials from it, and that's how we have these materials, because Sammy collected them from the farm, because they belonged to Monica. And with Ricky Leacock, who was very, very ill at the time, but he needed to be there too. They went and they showed the film at Telluride, and eventually that's how I met Sammy. So it did come around. So I'll end with one more Monica story, because I've told you some maybe not so nice stories. But on the other end of the spectrum, as you've enjoyed this film and you enjoy the relationship of the sound and music and the beautiful Samoan songs that we hear and the singing and whatnot, when the project was over, I was returning unused elements to the Flaherty farm in Dummerston, Vermont. And there's a caretaker taking care of this place. It's a national treasure, this place, I think. But nonetheless, the barn was converted into a studio, and just a wonderful scenario. But he's giving me a tour of the barn and showing me the various rooms, and he takes me into Monica's bedroom. He actually showed me Francis's bedroom first in the barn, not the house, but the barn, and then took me into Monica's. In a very Spartan-like monastic situation with a beautiful window looking out over the Vermont countryside. But a little table, a little wooden chair, and the bed. And he points to the bed while he's standing in the doorway, and I'm looking out the window. He points to the bed, and he goes, "Well, that's where Monica spent her last days. That's where she stayed." And she was racked with pain, the cancer. And he said there was really nothing anybody could do, so I was just applying the morphine to her, and that's how she got by. But the thing was, and here's the part where I'm telling you the story, you see, he said, the whole time, she sung the Samoan songs, and near the end, she was singing them at the top of her volume. Incredible. So thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the movie.